friends and welcome to my channel, and if you're new here, hello. My name's George Agenbar and I'm a UK music producer. Today's video is all about mastering, and by the end of the video you'll be able to master your mixes to sound professional. And this is all going to be done in the box using stock plugins. You can go and buy the most expensive mastering plugins and they may help, but we can get decent results using what we've got. So stay tuned to the end of the video and make sure you hit that subscribe button for new videos every Wednesday.
And things will never be the same when I hear your name since you kissed me in the rain.
I'm not gonna lie, this video was really hard to make. Mastering is tricky, and there's a lot to learn. I really take my hats off to professional mastering engineers, and if you can get someone else to master your song, then amazing. But in the real world, this isn't always possible. So what is mastering and why do we need it? Mastering is what we do after we finish mixing a track. It makes sure that our song sounds good on lots of different playback devices and streaming platforms. It's all about the wider picture, really. Mastering controls the overall dynamics in the song, so which bits are loud and which bits are quiet. It controls the frequency balance of the song, and it controls the track's overall volume. And it's important for two reasons. Firstly, so that our track sounds consistent, and secondly, to allow the song to compete in the so-called loudness war that modern music goes through nowadays. If a song isn't as loud, people will interpret it as dull and not finished and not professional, which is the last thing we want people thinking about our music. So mastering is really, really important. There are 4 essential things you should be asking for as a mastering engineer. Number 1, headroom. Headroom is the most important thing to be asking for. It's the amount of space between the peaks of your track and 0 decibels. This ideal headroom, or ideal amount of space, is 5 decibels. If there's no headroom, your track will be clipping and distorting, and as a mastering engineer, we can't touch that volume. We can't bring it up, we can't bring up the loudness. There's not a lot we can do in terms of mastering. If you have too much headroom, say more than 18 decibels of headroom, this is also an issue. And that's because as we turn the volume up, the noise floor will potentially become a problem. Number 2, lossless file formats. These are files such as WAVs or AIFFs. Compressed files, such as MP3s, really no use to us in mastering. When a file gets compressed, information above around 18 kHz gets lost in order to make the file smaller. And it's not just this, dependent on the bitrate of the file, some information can also be lost. So we're really looking for uncompressed files. Number 3, no normalization. When you bounce your mix ready to send to mastering, normalization is an option. And really there are no advantages to doing this. Normalization is when your DAW will apply a constant amount of gain across your track to bring the peaks of your track up to 0 decibels. And if your final mix has been normalized, it goes back to point number 1. There will be no headroom. And so there's really not a lot we can do in terms of mastering. Number 4, a reference track. Reference tracks are always important. It will allow you to compare your mastered track to a professionally mastered track in terms of frequencies and loudness. Ideally, you should take a couple of days in between the mixing process and the mastering process, just to make sure that you start mastering with a fresh pair of ears. But in the real world, we have deadlines to work to, and this isn't always possible. You should also make sure that you take 10-minute ear breaks within every hour to avoid ear fatigue. When our ears get tired, they lose sensitivity and will start making mistakes in the mastering process and start harming our track more than doing it any good. I would advise that you open up a new project and import your final bounce mix into that to start mastering. And this is because I think it puts you in the right mindset to master. It separates the mixing process and the mastering process completely. And before I begin to actually start any mastering at all, I sit down and listen to the bounce mix with a pen and paper in front of me, and I take notes. I take notes of everything I don't like about the track. And then I look through those notes and I ask myself, is this a mixing problem or is this a mastering problem? If the backing vocals are too loud in one place, that's a mixing problem. If there's a frequency imbalance that isn't instrument specific, that's a mastering problem. And you need to make sure that you go back and fix any of those mix problems before you begin mastering. And this is because no matter how good of a mastering engineer you are, mastering cannot and should not be fixing a bad mix. So it's really important that we get that right to begin with. I start my mastering chain by using a gain plugin, and this will allow me to switch my master between mono and stereo. And I like to be able to listen in both, just because not everyone's going to listen in stereo and not everyone's going to listen in mono. So I want to make sure that my master translates well in both situations. You find the gain plugin by going down to utility and pressing gain. And this is really nice and easy to do and won't affect the level of your track as long as you leave the gain dial on 0. So you simply turn mono on and off by pressing the on and off button. I do this so that I can switch between the two throughout the process, as some plugins can change the sound in mono and in stereo. And now we can begin to look at some compression. Next, I add compression to my track, which tames the dynamics of the song. It brings down the highest peaks and brings up the lowest bits. It can make your track sound fuller and emphasise nuances by bringing up the volume. I've chosen the Studio VCA compressor for this master, and I've chosen this one because it's quite transparent and keeps quite a natural sound. It won't really colour the sound of my mix. The compressor will make my track slightly louder, and this is a good thing because it will take some of the workload off of the limiter at the end of the chain, which we will get to later. If the limiter has to work too hard, it can add an unpleasantness to the sound. And when compressing and mastering, we don't want to set our ratio to more than 2:1, or to be reducing any more than 2 decibels really. And this is because the mix will become over-compressed and sound lifeless, as the dynamic range will have been completely squashed. Now, you might not be able to hear this on YouTube, but in the real world you will. This change is subtle, so for today you'll have to take my word for it and just see the compressor working on the dial. So here is the track without any compression.
Things will never be the same when I hear your name since you kissed me in the rain.
And here is it with compression.
Things will never be the same when I hear your name since you kissed me in the rain.
So it is a really subtle difference, but mastering is about making those small improvements. And the next thing we need to do is EQ. Now we need to EQ, and today I'm going to be using the linear phase EQ that Logic has. It's not my preferred way, which is to use a dual mono EQ to do some mid-side processing, but today we're going to keep it simple and use this linear EQ. This is the linear phase EQ, and it should look a bit familiar to us. It's pretty much identical to Logic's bog standard channel EQ. The difference between the two is that the linear phase EQ preserves the phase of an audio source and so has a smoother sounding effect. The reason we use it during mastering and not mixing as well is because it takes up a lot of computer power, so it can cause latency. When I was listening through the whole track, I was hearing a constant muddiness from around kind of 270 to 300 Hz, so I'm going to quickly go and take a little bit of that out.
Things will never be the same when I hear your name since you kissed me in the rain. And every little part of my beating heart can't help but fall apart.
So I'm a lot happier with that. And actually, I want to add a little bit more brightness to the song. So I'm going to think about adding a little bit around 4.2 kHz.
Things will never be the same when I hear your name since you kissed me in the rain. And every little part of my beating heart can't help but.
But as you can see, I'm only adding and subtracting tiny bits. And in mastering, we should be making subtle changes, improving the track by tiny percentages, which will add up in the end. So here's the track without the EQ.
Things will never be the same when I hear your name since you kissed me in the rain.
And here it is with EQ.
Things will never be the same when I hear your name since you kissed me in the rain.
So that sorted out the problems I could hear, and now we move on to the next step. Multiband compression is a really common mastering technique, and in Logic we use a plugin called a multipressor to do this. It controls the frequency imbalances across our song, and it does this by splitting all the frequencies in our mix into 4 separate bands and allowing us to compress each band individually. I'm going to go over how I've used the multipressor for this track, but as you can see there are lots of different settings and controls, so I'd be happy to make a more in-depth video on these if you would like, so just let me know down in the comments. Essentially, what we have here is 4 compressors underneath each frequency band, and you can adjust these frequency bands by pulling these vertical lines like so. Here I've decided to compress some of the frequencies around 100 to 400 Hz to clean up the track a bit more. So if I solo this frequency band,
Things will never be the same when I hear your name since you kissed me in the
You can hear that the frequencies being compressed are quite muddy. And then I've added some high frequencies, but the plugin will reduce the amount that's added if those frequencies exceed a certain limit. So here's the track without the multipressor.
Things will never be the same when I hear your name since you kissed me in the rain.
And here it is with the multipressor.
Things will never be the same when I hear your name since you kissed me in the rain.
It does just smooth over any frequency imbalances I had, and some of the keener-eyed of you may have noticed that I'm still working on the same problem areas that I was EQing out. The multipressor is going to tame these areas even more and help me get even further control of those frequency ranges. Again, it's about making the small changes. The next plugin we're going to use is an exciter. Next, I'd recommend that you use an exciter in your chain, which is a type of saturation plugin. These exciters work by slightly distorting and adding additional harmonics to the high ends of your mix. And this makes the mix sound a lot crisper and sparkle a lot more by effectively enhancing the high end. We do need to be really careful when using these though, not to over apply them, because if we do, the high end will overpower the low end and your mix will just sound bodiless and a bit lifeless. So we want to be really careful and just listen to what we're doing. This is how the exciter plugin looks. You use this slider to decide the frequency at which harmonics begin to get introduced. You edit this by dragging the line like so. The main knob, labelled harmonics, determines the ratio of harmonics to original signal. You may see that this is done in percentages and think, well, it's really odd that it goes up to 200%. But this is equivalent to a ratio of 2 to 1. And that might not seem like very much, but let me assure you that this is more than enough. I usually keep this dial between 8 and 14%. The dry signal button, when turned off, allows you to only hear the harmonics that have been added to your mix, so it will sound like this. So then you can see we have a choice of colour. Colour 1 sounds brighter than colour 2. So if we compare the two, colour 1 sounds like this.
Things will never be the same when I hear your name since you kissed me in the rain.
And this is colour 2.
Things will never be the same when I hear your name since you kissed me in the rain.
After adding that sparkle, we move on to stereo spreaders. Next, I use a stereo spreader, and these widen the stereo image, make your master sound more energetic and more exciting. And they do this by splitting all the frequencies in your song into bands, and evenly distributing these bands to either side. So if there's a band of mid-frequencies sent to the left, there'll be a different band of mid-frequencies sent to the right. So this is the stereo spreader plugin, and this is how it looks when you first open it. So first we want to decide the frequency range that the stereo spreader is going to work on, what frequencies it's going to spread. And I tend to keep this up high, normally above 2 kHz. Next we need to decide how much spread we want on each part of that frequency range we've chosen. So if I pull down the lower intensity slider, you can see that the lower end of what's being spread has gone down. And the upper end, you can do the same thing. And I tend to try and keep this in a triangle shape just because I think that's what sounds best. And then lastly, we decide how many bands we want our spreader to split the frequencies into. And again, I keep this up fairly high. The reason I keep everything up fairly high is because the effects that you've chosen are going to be most apparent in the high end. So this is the mix without the spreader.
Things will never be the same when I hear your name since you kissed me in the rain.
And this is with the spreader.
Things will never be the same when I hear your name since you kissed me in the rain.
And now it's on to limiters. Next we use the limiter to bring up the volume of our track. We want the track to be as loud as it can possibly be without distorting and without killing the dynamic range of our song. Now, I'm not tremendously experienced with using different types of limiters. I like to use the adaptive limiter in Logic. It's always seemed to work well for me. It's always been easy to get a really good sound, and it's nice and transparent sounding. It doesn't really colour the sound of my mastered track. So here's the adaptive limiter plugin. To increase the level of the track, we need to increase the gain dial. We want to make sure that there's a suitable out ceiling before we begin. The out ceiling decides the point at which the signal will not be allowed to exceed. the highest level your track will possibly get. This should be at least minus 0.5 decibels, so I'm going to go for about minus 0.6 just to be on the safe side. As we play the song and increase the gain dial, you should see the input level begins to increase on the input meter, and more signal will be reduced on the reduction meter. You should see that the output meter doesn't go above my out ceiling value. So let's have a look and begin to increase the gain.
Things will never be the same when I hear your name since you kissed me in the rain. And every little part of my beating heart.
Now you might say, well, how much gain do I know that I need to apply? On the reduction meter, you want to be aiming for a reduction of around -1 to -5 decibels. If your track is reducing too much, you need to turn the gain down, and if it's not reducing enough, you need to turn the gain up. There are then additional settings you can control. The look-ahead dial sets how far ahead the plugin looks. However, we don't need to worry too much about that today, as we have the optimal look-ahead field available to us. This is the optimal look-ahead time that your computer has calculated for you, ensuring that no latency will be introduced, so your computer won't begin to buffer. And this latency gets introduced because this look-ahead time takes up a lot of the computer's resources. So we simply press Apply. The Remove DC Offset button can be very important. A DC offset is when the waveform isn't resting at equilibrium. It gets displaced either above or below. And this happens when you use low-quality hardware. This is a problem because it means that one side can reach its maximum before the other, and so the headroom of the track is reduced. The Remove DC Offset button readjusts a wave so that its resting point is returned to equilibrium, so we want to make sure that that one is turned on. There is then the True Peak Detection button. Simply put, True Peak Detection is a more reliable method to detect distortion. The science of it is really interesting, but also quite complicated, so we can go through that in a different video. But for today, we want to make sure this button's turned on, as it's more likely to prevent distortion in our track. And now let's get our track ready for the streaming platforms. Okay, so you've come this far, you'd hope you'd be there, right? Unfortunately, we're not quite. Now we've reached a maximum loudness level for our track. Now we have to see whether this level is right or wrong for different streaming platforms, as every platform has different rules about this. So in this video, I'm going to be showing you how to get a track ready for Spotify. But as I said, there are different requirements for different platforms, so I will make sure that I leave those down in the description so you can go and have a look at those too. As I mentioned, each platform has rules for how loud a song's average loudness can be. And you can send off your track as it is at its maximum volume. But if your track doesn't meet these rules, the platform will apply their own algorithms to your song. This means that you won't know or have any control over what your song sounds like. So nowadays, most people decide to optimize their track for each individual platform. To check the loudness of my track for different platforms, I unsurprisingly use the loudness meter. This shows the level of perceived loudness, which is measured in units called LUFS. On this meter, I'm looking at the integrated value, which is the average value of loudness. If you want to start measuring this, you have to make sure that you press the Start button, or when you first load up the plugin, the Reset button. This has caught me out more times than you can imagine. What I've learnt is, if that you don't see the meters moving, you haven't pressed Start. So for Spotify, we're aiming for between -15 to -13 LUFS. Let's have a look and see how the track's doing.
Things will never be the same when I hear your name since you kissed me in the rain.
Right now, this is far too loud, so I'm going to go over to my limiter, which I kept open, and bring the gain down until I reach around about the right level.
Things will never be the same when I hear your name since you kissed me in the rain.
So that's going to be about right. Don't forget to check in the description about the other streaming platform specifications. And now our track is ready to bounce. Finally, we need to decide what file type and what bitrate we're going to export our tracks at. And this is called bouncing. Now, different streaming platforms again have different preferences for file types. For example, Spotify say that their ideal file type is a FLAC file. But SoundCloud asks for more waves and will also accept MP3s. So I'll make sure that I leave the specifications for each streaming platform down in the description as well. Okay, so to bounce you go up to File, down to Bounce, Project or Selection, or you can simply use the keyboard shortcut Command and B. You want to make sure that once again normalization is turned off. This only increases the volume of your track, and we've already got our perfect volume during mastering, so it's not needed. Here we can choose which file type we use, the resolution, and the sample rate. You'll also see that there's an option for dithering. Dithering, again, is a very big and interesting subject, but all we need to know for today is that if we are exporting our track at any other bit rate than 32 bits, we need to dither. The recommended setting is number 2, noise shaping, and then you can click OK and bounce your track. So just really quickly, I wanted to show you this really great free website called Loudness Penalty Analyzer. And this can be a real lifesaver. It allows you to check the volume of your masters against the rules for the streaming platforms. So you simply press select a file, choose your file, so I'll choose the one that I've mastered for Spotify, press open, and it will process your audio for you. And it will come up with this screen. And as you can see, Spotify won't be adding any volume to my track, so I know that I've got my master right. However, I know that if I was going to upload this master to iTunes, iTunes would add a whole decibel of sound to it. So I need to go back, change loudness, and create a separate mastered track to upload to iTunes. So now technically your track has been mastered, but I'm sorry to say that this isn't quite the end yet. Ideally, you want to take a couple of days where you just don't listen to the song and come back with a fresh pair of ears and make sure that you're still happy with the master a couple of days later. You also want to go and check your song on as many different speakers as you can. Not everyone in the outside world is going to be listening to your song through studio speakers in a perfect listening environment. So go and sit in a car and listen through a car radio. Go and listen through some standard earbud headphones. Listen through your phone. Listen through Bluetooth radios. Any speaker you can get your hands on, listen to your song through it. Cover all your bases. I would also really recommend getting an objective second opinion, and this is because we can get so close to a project that we begin to look past its flaws, so a second opinion is always really valuable. As I said earlier, mastering is tricky and there's a lot to learn, but it is an important process to understand. So if you're not there yet, don't worry, just keep mastering and practicing as much as you can. As a producer, it can be really beneficial and really help sell yourself if you can offer your clients both mixing and mastering. If you've liked this video, please hit the subscribe button and notification bell, give this video a like and let me know down in the comments what you thought, if there are any videos you'd like to see, and if you have any mastering tips or tricks that you like to use. Let's help each other out. Once again, thank you so much for watching and I will see you again soon.